Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 286 Project. My name is Chris Akers, and on this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, sport, and politics, and anything else we can think of. Today's guest, I'm delighted to say, is the comedian Leo Kearse. Hi, Leo.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm very well, extremely well. I've been wanting to talk to a comedian about the UK comedy scene and what's strange about it, what's good about it, etc. And obviously, knowing your appearances on TV and so on and so forth, I thought you'd be the perfect person to talk to. So, for those who don't know who you are, I imagine most of the people watching this will, but for those who don't, can you just explain who you are, how you started in stand-up as well, and where can we see you?
Yeah, so I started doing stand-up in 2009. I entered a gong show, so it was like a competition for really terrible comedians, and I won, and I was really surprised. I mean, not that meant I was good. I was just less bad than the other people. But I got it was a real buzz. You know, that getting up on stage. Not that it was a stage; it was just another part of the floor in a room in a pub. But just getting up in front of people. And shouting stuff, trying to make them laugh, was a real adrenaline rush. I came off. I couldn't sleep that night, just flying. So then I got addicted, and then my second gig went really well, and I thought, oh, I'm a natural at this. Turns out I was just had a couple of lucky gigs, and then I died terribly consistently for years and years, and then I just started. I left my job. And because I wasn't enjoying my job, and I thought I was just starting to make enough money to just about sort of cover my rent and my bills and stuff. So I became a circuit comedian, started doing festivals and doing shows and doing the Australian festivals, and doing some international stuff. Started to get bits and pieces of writing for other comedians and a little bit of TV work. And then, I mean, the big sort of turning point for me, the thing that made me was people trying to cancel me. So I got accused of transphobia, and then I got accused of racism, and those two things sort of propelled me to got me attention, because I think people could see that both, it was unfair. I think, if you accuse somebody of being transphobic, being racist or whatever, it's fine if they actually were. But if they're not, then you just look terrible, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then I sort of, I became more politicized, I guess, and I became one of the few comedians on the circuit who actually speaks from a right-wing perspective. And I know there's Jeff Norcott, but there's not many other people in the circuit who do that. So that gave me a bit of an angle as well.
Okay, so just going back to some of the things you said, you talked about obviously people try to cancel you because of before you're transphobic and racist. What was the reasons for that? Was it particular jokes you said, or did people just exaggerate in terms of just passing comments you made?
Yeah, weirdly, the racism thing, that had nothing to do with my comedy. So it was this lassie, Saima Ferdau, and she's not even a comedian. She works sort of behind the scenes in TV and stuff. But there's a big movement in the wake of Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of people going around looking for racism and trying to call it out on Twitter and stuff. So she tweeted that she tweeted this weird tweet saying, oh, I've been told that Leo is right wing, but he's not racist. And then upside down face, which means sarcasm. So it's like she's saying that I'm right wing, that I'm racist because I've voted Conservative, which is really weird because the Conservatives have got the most ethnically diverse cabinet in UK history. So if anything, they're showing they're not they're less racist than other parties. So yeah, I just thought, I think a lot of people would have just let it lie, but I guess I felt it was unjust, and also because comedy, especially around that time, I don't know if it's still as bad, but around that time, people were really, really, really keen to not be seen as racist and to be doing anything they could to sort of stand up against it. So then I noticed all these right-on clubs unfollowed me on Twitter. Some promoters stopped booking me. So yeah, I mean, I just felt it was really sort of wrong and unjust for me to be called racist for just because I'm right wing. I thought that was ridiculous.
So I'm going to talk about the UK comedy scene and how it's changed later. But obviously, you mentioned you're right wing yourself, and also you mentioned Jeff Norcott.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of right wing comedians now. Back when you started, is it 2008, 2009? What was the situation like then? Was it as either just the same or even worse? Like, how was it then with regards to comedians identified as right wing?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I think there was more sort of shocking male comedians like Brendan Burns, people like that. The Doug Stanhope, the comedians everybody looked up to were quite sort of abrasive and came out and sort of said it like it is and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, although that's not right wing per se, it's more of a sort of libertarian thing than the left wing comedians tend to just follow a groupthink, and they don't want to be seen to stray outside that field of thought, because then they'll be seen as a radical. And you can see it happening in other areas of culture. So J.K. Rowling, for example, she's been a lifelong left leaning, Labour voting, right on politically correct person. But then she has one opinion that doesn't match with what the approved herd opinion is. So she disagrees that transgender women should be in women's sports and in women's prisons and stuff like that, and she gets cancelled. All of a sudden she's a demon. She gets called a Nazi and all the rest of it. So it's kind of the same in comedy. Like, although, I mean, when I started out, I was on the open mic circuit, so it's it's a bit wilder. People come out and say crazy stuff all the time. But certainly, once you start making some money, there's a pressure. There's a sort of implicit pressure to sort of follow this group thing. Man, it's got so bad. Like, comedians really worry about what their image is and what their brand is. I was at Top Secret with my mate Nico, and another comedian came up to him and said, Nico, are you right wing? And Nico's like, not really. Why? And he's like, oh, your Twitter, the optics in your Twitter are right wing. And it's like, for a comedian to use a word like optics, like they're, some brand manager for a corporation. It was a really weird moment. Like, comedians are supposed to be, raw and passionate and saying their own personal truth, not like carefully, following focus groups and stage managing their curated image so it matches all the approved opinions. It was a really weird moment for me. It showed me how much, the world of arts and culture has got away from free expression and is now, you've got to follow the herd or you can be cancelled.
So, yeah, it was weird because I've always felt that comedians should be rebellious in many respects. Even if I didn't agree with them, there needs to be this rebellion as well. And I'm just wondering, why did this start? I know it's easy to say everything's woke now, and there is an element of that, but why has this group thing just prevailed across comedy in particular?
I think social media has played a big role in it. So everybody can see, other people's opinions, and also everybody's got a voice. So then you get this herd mentality. So it's enabled the sort of, like in communist Russia and Mao's China, places like that, there's the same sort of peer pressure, making sure people, followed the party line, at least, publicly followed the party line. But now it's sort of being done on social media. We're doing it to ourselves. People have turned into the Stasi. Like, you can see there's a comedian recently, Archie Brown, some old footage of him using racial slurs in his comedy came up, and a lot of people were offended by it or said that they were offended by it. Even though the point he was making in the comedy was obviously a sort of an anti-racist point. He wasn't being racist. I think that would have been harder to defend. But people were like telling on him and like phoning comedy clubs saying, "Don't book this guy." And it's like, man, you're literally doing what the Stasi did in East Germany, but like at least they were getting paid. Now you're just taking your day off to like ruin somebody's life, and you're not even like, I don't even see what the, like, if I see something I don't like, or a comedian I see tells a joke I don't like, man, I just move on. I watch another comedian. I don't like, I'm not like, right, I've got to get this person. This person's never going to be able to work again. I'm going to destroy them. They're not going to be able to feed their family. It's a weird mentality.
Yeah, so you talk about this destroying of comedians. obviously it's people that are doing that, but surprisingly, it seems like some of the people are comedians themselves. Why do you think that is? Why, even if they don't like the joke, why don't they just say butt out? Why do they feel the need to add on to the pylon?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with Alfie Brown, there's a lot of comedians piled on him as well. I mean, sometimes comedians will pile on because they see an opportunity to sort of get some attention for themselves, you know, and maybe some of them, you know, genuinely feel that it's the right thing to do. You know, this person 8 years ago, he did this terrible thing, and now he must, you know, he must repent and must be punished for it. But I think a lot of the time it's just, you know, you see rubbish open mic comedians like Mark Grimshaw having a go at, you know, better known comedians, more successful comedians all the time, and it's a way of sort of if you can get somebody to engage with you, all of a sudden it elevates you to their level, and you know, you get some of that attention. But yeah, man, I don't get it. I mean, I guess a lot of it. I know that some of the people would have felt like righteously offended by what Alfie Brown said. I mean, because to be honest, man, the trouble was I couldn't really defend him either myself, because, you know, even though I think comedy is a sacred, the stage should be a sacred space where you can, you know, say things that wouldn't be acceptable off the stage. I just didn't think the joke was funny enough to warrant using, you know, racial language. And you could see he was sort of trying to be edgy, and he was trying to make these points, but man, it just didn't work. It was really hard. It was really hard to defend him, you know.
So, I mean, I've not heard a joke, and I'm not saying to repeat it, but I just wonder, is one of the problems with comedy now that instead of looking for the context of what someone says, we almost look for the headline. So a great example of that from years ago with Frankie Boyle, what he said about disabled children. Instead of actually looking at the whole joke, we just looked at the subject matter. Is that a major issue in comedy now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And people approach comedy in bad faith. And, you know, somebody can be saying something. Obviously in comedy, there's a lot of subtext and a lot of irony. So, you know, what you say at face value isn't necessarily just you stating what you believe, or, you know, stating what you think is a fact. You're saying it's a joke. You know what I mean? You're quite often you're saying something ridiculous or hyperbolic, or something that twists things on its head to make a joke. But yeah, people approach comedy in bad faith now, like looking for something to get offended by, and it's a weird state of affairs. If I'm to my mate Nico, I was just talking about, you know, somebody said that he was he being homophobic on stage? They said he was being homophobic. Well, obviously he was making a joke, and they'd missed, because it was a drunk woman, she'd missed the bit where, you know, the setup. So she just heard these themes being discussed and assumed that he was being homophobic, as if you could get on stage in London and just be homophobic and get away with it. You know what I mean? That's the other thing about comedy. It doesn't really need to be policed, because we're performing in front of an audience. And unless you're doing, you know, some neo-Nazi rally, like, they're not going to be fine with you doing, like, you know, anything that's nasty or racist or homophobic or whatever. So you can trust that we're, you know, even if we're talking about these issues or you know, playing with ideas around them, like, we're not going to be saying anything genuinely nasty, because that wouldn't wash with people.
I went to a comedy gig in the last year, and the gig was great, but this particular comedian said a joke about black man. The black man wasn't a punchline; it was just in the context of the joke. And what I found funny is I actually laughed at the joke, and then I looked at the corner of my eye and I realised I was the only black person in the crowd, because everyone was focusing on me, waiting for me to laugh before everyone else could laugh as well. And I thought, gosh, I've got some power at long last. But I was just wondering, do we underestimate the audience? Because it seems to me, in not just in comedy, but in art in general, you seem to have groups of people that feel they can talk about other groups and people and feel like they're protecting them. Whereas I don't think we sometimes trust the audience in regards to their reaction, what they feel about it.
Yeah, and people do sort of assume that the audience are just these simpletons who are going to take everything at face value. Well, if I did a documentary with Adam Rowe, the Liverpool comedian, so he did a documentary about cultural appropriation, and if it's appropriate, if it's a problem, and all the rest of it. And so he interviewed people. He interviewed this lassie who said, you shouldn't do jokes about, this stuff, other cultures, all the rest of it in your comedy, because that's offensive, and it's the power structures and all this blah blah blah. And so then he told a joke, and she laughed. She involuntarily laughed, and then caught herself and was like, "You can't tell that joke." And he's like, "Yeah, but you laughed. Sorry, my daughter's shouting her head off. I don't know if you can hear that on the thing.
Right.
She just had her food. She's screaming out. She's not on her own. Like, my wife's looking after her. I haven't just like stuck a baby in the corner. But nobody puts baby in the corner. But yeah, this lassie, she said, you shouldn't tell that joke because I laugh because I understand it and I understand the subtext and the nuance, but other people will take it at face value and then they'll feel emboldened to go and commit hate crimes. And it's just this weird like thing of like, oh, I am so smart and I understand it, but other people, oh, they can, for them, it's weird. Like you say, it's underestimating the audience. Like people are pretty smart, especially if you're going to spend 15 quid going to watch some comedy. Like, you're going to want to go and see some comedy. You know what I mean? You're not going to be like stupid. I don't think stupid people really go to comedy because it's going to go over their heads.
Yeah, indeed. I'm just wondering, going back to comedians trying to cancel other comedians as well, and certain comedians almost purposely restricting themselves to what they say in case they get cancelled.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being harsh. I'm just wondering, are comedians become a little bit too soft now? Or is that me being harsh in terms of before they would at least try and defend the joke, whereas now, not all comedians, but maybe some don't defend it as rigorously as they should?
Yeah, and I think people are worried. They're worried about being seen to be defending it because then it'll damage their own career prospects. So all these, I mean, I hate to use the word woke, but all the TV commissioning, Netflix, everything is systemically woke now. And they've got all these sort of blue-haired young women programming everything, commissioning everything, and they hate anything that's funny and anything that isn't woke. So if you stick your hand up and say, wait a minute, I think that joke that guy said that you're all crying about, I think it was okay and he should be allowed to make mistakes on stage, then they're all going to, people's perception is that all these woke commissioners are going to be like, whoa, we can't have this guy. So everybody goes along with it, just out of that, very subtle peer pressure and that subtle sort of, it's the same way that people covered up for Jimmy Savile. We're like, how could you allow this man to commit horrific crimes? And it's like, well, nobody wanted to cause a fuss at work and get fired or get passed over for promotion. People, at the end of the day, people really worry about quite small things in their own personal lives, and they'll allow horrible evil to happen. I'm not saying that cancelling a comedian is as bad as Jimmy Savile, but actually it's probably worse. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think people just go along with it. We've seen it in other societies. In East Germany, people, just very subtle social pressures, create these juggernauts of social conformity and social movements. And you're seeing that in publishing, where they're not publishing some authors, and they're having sensitivity readers going through Roald Dahl's books and putting content warnings on the front of books. You're seeing it in every part of arts and culture at the moment. But yeah, especially in comedy, and it's annoying because like comedy is the one thing where you need to be outrageous, or you at least need to be able to crash sometimes. It's like, imagine being a racing car driver, but if you ever crash your car, that's your career over. Man, that'd be the worst racing car driver in the world. You've got to be able to crash sometimes. Same with comedy. So yeah, man, I've noticed comedy's getting much worse. The comedy on TV and all this stuff's getting cancelled. What was the thing with Nish Kumar? Was that Mock the Week or the whatever the one with Nish Kumar was? It got cancelled. All this stuff's getting cancelled. And I think people are looking to YouTube. Everybody's blowing up on social media, and YouTube, you're your own editor, you're your own commissioner, so you don't need to, stuff doesn't need to get ticked off by all these people. So you can just, I put a video up yesterday, it's already on it's about 60,000 views. So like, instead of waiting years and trying to get that idea through somebody through some commissar at the BBC. I can just go straight on YouTube and take my ideas straight on there.
I was going to say, going back to the audience, and you talk about putting jokes onto YouTube. Does YouTube, a platform like that, allow for mistakes that aren't allowed now in comedy? Whereas, like, for example, and I'm not just talking about live comedy, like TV comedy, not just TV comedy, TV drama, where you could make a series and you might not be the best thing in the world, but the commissioners would see something in there to think, actually, we could give this another chance. Yeah. I'm just wondering, with comedy now, you don't get any second chances now. It's almost like people expect you to be as good as that straight away.
Yeah, and like you don't get chances to. I think if you're at a certain level, you get the chance to make the mistake. So like Ricky Gervais, he can say stuff that, you know, the transgender lobby come out and they're like, whoa, this is so transphobic, this is evil. Same with Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock. They can make, you know, not mistakes. I mean, they're making good points. It's really good comedy, but it's obviously offending a bunch of people. I remember Netflix, all these workers went on strike and protest, you know, had these big demonstrations and stuff at Dave Chappelle. But if you're Dave Chappelle, you know what I mean? You don't need any comedy bookers to you know, you don't need to keep them happy, because you're big, you got loads of money, people want to see you, like, so you're always going to be able to work. But it's the lower down people, you know, somebody at the level of Alfie Brown, there's a real risk he could get totally cancelled.
Yeah, so you talked about social media earlier, and you just said about comedians of a certain level can make mistakes. However, the likes of Ricky Gervais, Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, regardless of what I said about them, now just speak their mind and whatever, whereas other people at that same level will still say silence, regardless of their popularity and the influence they have in the comedy industry. What separates those two particular groups, do you think?
The super successful people and the sort of less successful.
No, so for example, okay, someone like Kevin Hart, for example, what happened with him at the Oscars? He could argue in America he's at the same level as, say, Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle, whereas Chappelle and Rock stay true to their beliefs. Kevin Hart seemed to capitulate. So even amongst the most successful people, do you think there's only a small percentage of those that actually have the guts to say, I don't care what you think, if the audience like it, audience like it, I'm just going to go with it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Kevin Hart thing was different from what Dave Chappelle said, because Dave Chappelle, man, his stuff, even if you disagree with him, he's really funny and he's making some solid socio-political points. You don't have to totally agree with him. I don't think he's a hateful guy. I don't think he hates transgender people or anything like that. You know, people say that he does. I think that's nonsense. Whereas Kevin Hart, like, they dug up stuff from 11 years ago that was, you know, homophobic. So he couldn't really stand and be like, yeah, no, I stand by that comment, you know, because it was, you know, it was pretty bad. But it's, man, like, the idea that, like, something that somebody said 11 years ago is still having relevancy today, like Kevin Hart, what would he have been in his 20s when he said it? And it's like he could have learned, he could have totally changed his opinions. So it's ridiculous to go back. And if you think, like, before we had social media, Kevin Hart would have just said that comment to somebody in the pub. And it's like, you wouldn't get somebody then dragging up that comment 11 years later, being like, well, Kevin Hart said this thing in the pub 11 years ago. Everybody would be like, what, are you mental? Nobody cares. Like, why would anybody care? But because it's a tweet, you know, these offense archaeologists can go back and uncover tweets that people said that are now objectionable.
So you talk about the length of time there. Do you think in art in general there's a lack of forgiveness? Yes, what Kevin Hart said was arguably wrong, but, well, not arguably, it was wrong, but it was 11 years ago. No one seems to think, okay, he's shown that he's changed person from that. It seems to be that even from way back when, I think there was a case years ago of a woman who was part of some governmental initiative to do with the NUS, National Students, but she was fired from that role, or dismissed from that role, because of something she tweeted when she was 15. I'm just wondering, is there like a lack of forgiveness amongst people in general, and that makes the job of not just comedians but artists in general a lot harder?
Yeah, there is the lack of forgiveness and the lack of sort of knowledge that, and also Twitter has changed as a platform. You know, if you go back 12 years, it was the sort of Wild West where people were saying outrageous things and flirting with danger and sort of, you know, making semi-racist jokes and stuff. So it had that feel to it, and now it's much more sanitized, and people get reported, and people get called out all the time. So I think there's, and funnily enough, we've sanitized social media a lot more, but I think there's a lot more divisiveness in society now. Well, I think around about the 2000s through to like 2010, something like that, 2012, everybody was just getting on. That's what I felt anyway. Everybody was just getting on, and now it's like, man, like you got to feel bad for being a man, you got to feel bad for being white, you got to feel bad for being heterosexual. There's all these things that you get bashed over the head for, and I think it's breeding more resentment. It's creating more problems than it's trying to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. And we've talked about certain topics that comedians have been in trouble for speaking about. Is there anything taboo that you shouldn't joke about in comedy, or is it just about the context only?
Yeah, man, I don't think there are any things that are off topic, because yeah, like, I mean, you don't know what the joke's going to be. I mean, I've joked about terrible things. I've joked about concentration camps. And there's a way to make anything funny. The most horrific things can be funny. It just depends how the joke treats them. And I've seen even things like Nadine Dorries was saying that Jimmy Carr would have to be punished for his joke about gypsies. But the thing that people hate about comedy, the reason comedy gets under people's skin so much when it's a joke like that, like his gypsy joke, was it's got an element of truth in it. The most horrific joke has got an element of truth, and that's why people laugh. But people don't want to recognize that truth. They want to pretend that, yes, we all want to have gypsies living in a field at the bottom of our garden. Like, you're not allowed to sort of say that maybe that's not what people want. It's like a funny thing. I mean, I've got nothing against the traveling community or whatever. But I think we can all recognize that, if they turn up in the village green, you're like, damn. And it's like, I think if we don't acknowledge that, man, if you push that underground and you don't let people acknowledge those feelings, then it's going to pop up. It's like pushing bubbles down in wallpaper. It's going to pop up somewhere else, and wherever else it pops up could be, it could be a much worse. Then if people aren't allowed to like joke about it and release the tension that way, people might vote for a politician who says that they're gonna deal with the issue. So I think it's better to joke about things and better to have comedians talking about these things than have some bigoted politician having sort of I hate to say the word far right because I get called far right all the time, but but yeah, you're gonna see it pop up in ways that are worse than a comedian joking about it.
A few years ago, and this is a bit personal me, I had like a few months where I was going through some really bad stuff and I was just not in a good way. And what snapped me out of it was I was watching a comedian on TV, and the routine they were doing was so funny. They just snapped me out of my stupor.
Yeah.
Kind of alluded to it there. Do we underestimate the power of humor, not just to make us laugh, but as you say, in terms of helping regulate our emotions and showing the world for its absurdities?
Yeah, man, that's interesting, because I definitely underestimate the power of humor, given what you've just said. I always think like what all comedians do is essentially throwaway and pointless, and there's no sort of deeper resonance. I mean, I know, like, because comedians are always like, oh yeah, man, we're like public philosophers. We're the only people who can get up on stage and talk about stuff, and then they get up on stage and they just talk about their dick. There's not a sort of deeper resonance. But yeah, man, like if that happened to you, that's sort of making me reappraise the sort of power of comedy in my head. And actually, yeah, some of the times in my life where I've most been like in the moment and like just having the wildest, like most hilarious experiences when I'm watching a comedian. And also they do make, comedians make good social points sometimes, like Chris Rock. I mean, Chris Rock is a classic example of he's got that bit that uses the N-word, and you'd think if you saw it written down, you'd be like, man, that is completely unacceptable. But when he does it, it totally works, because you can see he's speaking from his own personal truth. He's not trying to change. He's not putting an encyclopedia entry in. He's just saying, this is what I feel in this moment. And also the point he's making is actually quite a socially progressive point, because I think when he made, I don't know if you know the bit, but when he did that bit, it was like the mid-90s in America.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of white people would have maybe had, just seen all black people as the same. And he was making the point, actually, no, there's different strata. We've got, there's the black middle class, there's different levels of black society. So, don't just see us as, don't just judge us by the skin color kind of thing.
Yeah, and you've talked a lot there, obviously previous answers about offense as well. Obviously, I don't think comedians go to hurt people, but in saying that, is there, not just in comedy, but in art, is there a time when actually offense can be a good thing? Or is it just you shouldn't try to offend anyone at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think offense is absolutely essential. I mean, if you look at all the sort of progressive ideas through the history of humanity, so like, the civil rights movement, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, these were all essential movements, but they were offensive to loads of people. What if you got some redneck or whatever who's like, wait a minute, like, I'm offended by everybody being able to use the same water fountain. So what then? Like, we've got to worry about his feelings so much that we don't do it. And I think that's where we're at now. We've got all these people who are like, oh, this hurts my feelings. And then everybody's like, oh, we can't have this person's feelings hurt. And it's like, why not? Why can't we hurt this person's feelings? Also, they got blue hair. We should hurt their feelings. We need to bring back bullying. We need to specifically hurt anybody who complains about their feelings being hurt. We need to hurt them more.
Hurt them even more.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's I think it's an interesting one, because I'm just wondering, I don't think you can, not that I would ever cause offense, but I think sometimes people get stuck in a spiral where you think, I can't remember which comedian who said it, but they said, if a comedian came on the TV and talked about a joke about why did a chicken cross the road, someone would always get offended by that because they've seen a chicken cross the road and die while crossing the road.
Yeah.
Do people sometimes get into a spiral of offense where you almost censor yourself to the point of blandness because you try and take little bits out and try not to offend particular people or particular groups?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, certainly if you're not at the Ricky Gervais level, you got to watch what you say, because like one, misspoken, mistimed line can end your career. So that's, I think it's much easier to be a comedian who just speaks about nothing but like airplane food and, what it's like being a dad or whatever. Because if you're talking about social issues, you can get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, indeed. How has obviously we've talked quite a lot about this anyway, but how has the UK comedy scene changed from when you started in other ways other than what we've just talked about?
So when I started, it was the sort of tail end of the circuit being a place where you could make a decent middle-class living. So in the 90s and early 2000s, we had the jongleurs clubs. There's like 19 jongleurs clubs in the country. And, comedians were making 50, 60 grand just doing the circuit. And you'd have agents who'd book you in for, like you just get you'd be doing like a Thursday, then 2 shows on a Friday, 2 shows on a Saturday, a show on a Sunday, all in one jongleurs club, and getting like a whack of money, getting $1.5 grand or whatever. And bear in mind, it's the 90s, you could buy a flat for like 30 grand. So comedians had it great. And then, it's sort of changed. Now the circuit is much more fragmented. The fees haven't really gone up. So you're not really getting more than, I did a couple of gigs the other weekend. It was like £100 for each gig. And, so I couldn't, man, there's no way I could raise a family. That's a Friday, Saturday night, there's no way. And obviously, like a lot of the time you can do, more than one gig, but some gigs pay £200, even £300, but man, yeah, it's not it's not a place you can have that sort of that comfortable middle class income anymore. So you've got to be doing something else as well. You've got to be doing, it's got to either be a stepping stone to TV, or you've got to get big, you know. So I think the circuit's sort of, you know, winnowed down, and you can see people from the old days really lamenting, you know, how good it used to be. I wish I'd got in time for those days. But yeah, man, that said, it is a stepping stone to other stuff. Like after you know, when comedy was banned during lockdown, I went into politics, and the sort of skills I learned from doing comedy were very useful in politics. And you know, doing TV. I mean, I'm going to be hosting a show on GB News tonight, and it's the skills are very sort of yeah, definitely helps for doing other stuff. And also doing online stuff. Online is just, oh man, it's an absolute godsend. It's the best thing ever. Like YouTube, stuff like that, social media. I know a lot of comedians have blown up on social media, and that's the route. The big change in the industry in the UK was people used to like write a show for the Edinburgh Festival, take it to the Edinburgh Festival, and then like all these industry bigwigs would come and see your show, and you'd like schmooze them in the bars and all that kind of stuff. It was a big sort of meat market, a big cattle market for the industry. That's totally changed now. Edinburgh is kind of pointless unless, you know, you're making some money there. And now, you know, you're much better off getting big online, and then people, you know, you can get your audience direct to you. I've got a Patreon, and you know, I don't have a huge amount of Patreons, but you know, I make enough. I make the same amount of money from that as I would from going and doing like, you know, a week of gigs. So, and also it lets me, you know, instead of traveling, instead of driving to Cornwall or whatever to do some show, I can just sit at home working on ideas and coming up with stuff. So yeah, online has been an absolute godsend, and then it also gives you the visibility. So then people from, you know, comedy bookers, TV people, whatever, see your stuff, and they're like, "Wow, we should get this guy on to talk about this." Even like, I mean, I've been commissioned to write articles and all sorts. So yeah, online is just, man, it's the best thing that ever happened to comedy. But I do feel bad for some of the old, you know, the old school guys who, you know, were used to making all that money on the circuit in the 90s. If they didn't buy a house, if they just spent that money on cocaine, man, they are screwed now.
Indeed. I watched an episode of Trigonometry, I think from last year, and it had Sean Walsh on there. And it was interesting because at the end he talked about his new show, how that was on YouTube. And I went to watch it and I thought it was actually very good. And considering what happened with him with the whole issue with Strictly and what happened to him there, I thought he was very good. Do you think, now before, back in the 90s, I imagine he would have had to do that with DVDs and then hopefully he'll get a cult following. Has online in many respects replaced the DVD section of the a comic's income at all?
Yeah, I think so. Because like, yeah, you can't really, some comedians sell, instead of DVDs, they sell like a little card with a QR code that you can then go and watch their private video or whatever. So I guess it's made it easier like that. But yeah, comedians used to sell DVDs at shows, you know, get their own DVDs made and sell them at shows. Man, Sean's a great comedian as well. And it's great to see somebody with his, you know, at his level going and doing trigonometry. I think a lot of comedians would be like, oh no, I can't do that. It's, you know, I need to watch my image. I need to like be careful. But he's like, no, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to go do the show. And man, I've gigged with Sean quite a bit at Top Secret, and some comedians get big, and you know, they're not absolute killers when they're on stage. Sean is like one of those guys. He got big. He's done all this TV. He's done, you know, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. Man, that guy absolutely storms it. I mean, he's probably one of the top 10 comedians in the country, probably one of the top 5 in terms of like, you know, absolutely being able to smash it on stage.
Yeah, and I was thinking actually with his gig on YouTube, obviously with Netflix, you've got comedians who do comedy specials on there, logs of Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, etc. But in terms of TV comedy, what's the future of it and what we call terrestrial TV? Because as you said earlier, a lot of shows like The Mash Report, that's been cancelled, Mark the Week, that's been cancelled. You don't really see anything on ITV or Channel 4 really. So in terms of actual stand-up comedy on terrestrial TV, is that just dead in the water? Has that been transferred to YouTube, or is there would hopefully be a future of it? Do these things go in cycles?
Yeah, I mean, terrestrial TV is kind of it's not looking so great for things like BBC, these big channels. It's and you can see newer channels like GB News, who I do a lot of work for. It's they put a lot of effort into online. So the sort of the old model of just having a TV channel, people would just sit down and watch the TV and skip between the channels. That's totally gone. Now people are like, looking for what they want to watch. If people want to watch GB News, they can watch it on TV. They can then go to bed and continue watching on the live stream on YouTube. Then get in the car, go drive somewhere and listen to it on DAB radio. They can get the clips coming up on Twitter. So it's right across every medium. And it's really geared towards that. Man, I don't think the BBC is going to be there in 5 years, maybe not even that long. I don't think there's much of a case for the BBC. I don't know how you can justify charging people 170 quid or whatever it is for something they're not even going to watch. And it's if you are going to charge them 170 quid, at least give them an option to not subscribe.
Yeah, so you think the BBC won't be there in that long, or would it be just a case that the TV license will be reformed in some way?
I think they've got to make it a subscription service. It's not fair to, you got some little old lady who's got to pay 170 quid to own a TV. When I tell friends from America, I'm like, yeah, we got to get a TV license in this country, a license to own a TV. Never mind a gun, a license to own a television. It's man, why don't we have a license for the dishwasher as well? Got to have your dishwasher license and a washing machine license, knife and fork license. It's ridiculous. It's totally against the sort of essence of free market and liberalism. And also, BBC is, to a certain extent, state propaganda. It's dependent on keeping the government on side to maintain the license fee and stuff. So yeah, I don't think it provides. It's not a healthy fourth estate. I know people who work for the BBC, and I know that it's quite a sort of elitist Oxbridge institution. Like my cousin works for them, and she's pretty posh. Went to private school and stuff. So I mean, I don't think there'd be much chance of somebody like me, doing much in the BBC, like doing the MASH report or anything like that. Everybody's sort of quite posh.
Yeah, and we talked about comedy panel shows there, but obviously you had the old comedy dramas and actual comedies, likes of say a Father Ted, for instance, or The Office. Would it be fair to say that those on terrestrial TV seem to be getting less and less and less?
Yeah, man, it's interesting. So those ones you picked out as examples, they're all from 20 years ago or 25 years ago. Like Father Ted, man, it was amazing. And I know Graham Linehan now. Funnily enough, he's been cancelled. He was going to do Father Ted the musical, and because of his, because what he said about, protecting women's spaces and women's sports and stuff, he's been that's not happening. The Office, Phoenix Nights. These are great sitcoms, but they're from ages ago, and I can't think of a UK sitcom since then that reaches those levels. I thought Fleabag was pretty good, but that's it in 20 years. Whereas in America, there's been Arrested Development. I can't think what other sitcoms they've had, but I think there's definitely more freedom to make something funny in America.
Well, this was the next question I was going to ask you in regards to American comedy. Obviously, you're more of a student of the comedy scene in general than I am, but why is it about America? Do you think that makes their comedy? Yes, they've had people who have cancelled, but it seems to be a bit more daring, a bit more on the nose, a bit more funny. Why do you think that is compared to the UK?
Yeah, and it's flipped because it used to be in the 90s, the UK was famous for having, more interesting TV shows and comedy and stuff, because we weren't just doing stuff with the lowest common denominator. But now it's flipped. Now now the UK, because it's not a meritocracy, broadcasting in the UK isn't a meritocracy. So the TV comedy is pretty dull, pretty boring. It's all getting cancelled. Like you said, Mock the Week, Mash Report, all that stuff. Because there's nothing funny about somebody comes out and just repeats the accepted opinion and then everybody claps. You know what I mean? People will go along with it in the room, but like it's not funny. You want somebody to come along. Comedy's supposed to, like, you know, speak to power, and the left have got the cultural power in the West at the moment. So we should obviously be taking the piss out of that. Seems just obvious to me. Like if you're just reinforcing leftist ideology, that's not interesting or funny or anything. So yeah, I think in America now, I mean, obviously it's a bigger market as well. It's like 400 million people, but America's just like people have got more balls there to do something that's going to be. They'll take more risks. There's more money to invest in things, but also Americans don't have this culture of being a total pussy all the time.
Yeah.
I think the pussification of UK society is terrible. We've got all these like men who can't grow facial hair just like making all the decisions, and it's like, no, we need to bring back school bullying, and we need to like get those people back in their boxes, and we need like men with big swords and like, you know, axes and stuff to like come back and start making decisions again. People with names like, you know, Ethelred and William Wallace, guys wearing chainmail. None of these people, no comedy commissioner at the BBC could fire a bow and arrow. None of them have ever. I bet most of them don't even eat meat. Never mind like killed their own meat.
Is it more corporatized here, the comedy scene, like on TV or like on some of these live comedy gigs?
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, going back to the sort of systemic wokeness, man. I was watching some today because like my favorite thing is watching terrible UK comedy. You know, Channel 4 had commissioned this series of you know, short bits, but they hadn't gone to like the funniest people. They hadn't gone to like Nico Yearwood, Darius Davies, all these like funny guys. Instead, they've gone to like the people who had the right identities. There's like a trans woman. There's like a fat guy who's got autism. There's like, you know, there's all this sort of stuff. So they hadn't just, and the annoying thing was, you know, they're not picking there are people that they could tick the box with who are much funnier. They're not even picking the best ones that tick the box. Like Nico's from the Caribbean. He like totally ticks a box. You know what I mean? Darius is Iranian or something, so he totally ticks a box. He's like, you know, his dad's Muslim. He's definitely autistic. So man, there's so many boxes you could tick with Darius. But he's actually funny. The thing is, because they don't sort of play the game. They don't like go along and, you know, schmooze and stuff. That's the other thing about comedy. I think you're expected to sort of get on stuff. You got to schmooze. You got to like speak to the producers and everything in the right way, and the commissioners in the right way. So it's very easy for, you know, posh kids to do it, and it's very easy for the sort of cool set to do it. But they're not the funny people. It's like artists. You never get like Van Gogh. He cuts his ear off. He's crazy. He's just drinking absinthe, but amazing paintings. You get some guy who can like fill in forms and stuff. It's not going to be as good at painting. So it's the same in comedy. Like I think we've become a culture of sort of form filling and schmoozing. And those people, those, you know, very careful Machiavellian, reasonable people never say anything funny.
So is it like based on metrics, I take it? So say if a TV comedy comes up and they'll look at what percentage of the audience will say 18 to 35, or what percentage of it is elderly. You're saying it seems to be more driven by that as opposed to, is the joke actually funny? Like, to give you an example, something like Peep Show. Yeah. I mean, I found it was funny, but as far as I'm aware, it didn't get high audiences. But I think Channel 4 at the time just thought, you know what, this is funny. It has got a bit of a cult following, so therefore we'll just go for it. And there's so many of it. You don't really get those, not just comedy, you don't really get those shows anymore.
Yeah, it's got to succeed straight away. And it's the same like Blackadder. The first series of Blackadder was a total flop, but the BBC were like, no, we're just going to give it another chance. And I think sometimes you get great artists coming from that. I mean, Radiohead, you know, when they came out, you know, they had like one hit, but then, you know, they were the record label wasn't didn't think they were going to do anything. But then they turned out to be great, and everybody made loads of money. I think it's the same with comedy. You got to let people make mistakes, because Peep Show, actually talking about it, Peep Show was great. It's one that I overlooked, and when I was saying like there's no good TV comedy. Although those two guys turned out to be a bit wanky in real life. One of them wrote a book about how to be a man, and it's all like, oh, you got to cry, you got to, oh man, no, that's not how you be a man.
One of the things I was going to say actually is you talked earlier, well, at the start, you said in comedy when you're live, you had this adrenaline rush. So, yeah. I mean, I used to do spoken word poetry for a number of years, just open mics. And I'll be honest, the first few gigs I did, I was absolutely terrified getting on stage. I had a lot of mental health issues at the time, but I thought, no, I've got to do this. Comedians have something different now because you've got the hecklers to deal with. So how did you do the first heckler, and did that put you off for initially to in terms of doing comedy?
Yeah, and especially the gigs that you start out on. I don't know if you can hear my daughter. She's not screaming. It sounds like she's screaming.
It's cool.
She's having a great time. She's like, she loves singing and like just going, ah. But she's 24. But no, the gigs when I started out were they're tough rooms, because like a lot of open mics, it's like nobody really wants to be there. You're performing to other comedians who also are just doing a spot, and you're performing to like a few unlucky people who've been dragged in, because the standard is always terrible. I love going to watch them, man, though, because you see stuff you don't see anywhere else. But yeah, like as soon as you start getting better gigs. As soon as you start getting paid gigs, they suddenly become so much easier. It's mad, because somebody who's paid like 15 quid to go and see some comedy, they expect it to be good because they paid £15. If you paid nothing and you're just like downstairs in a pub and everything looks like shit and the comedians look like shit and there's no people in the audience, man, you're not going to expect that comedian to be good. And it's a weird thing. It's almost like once you're through that bottleneck, it becomes much easier.
Yeah. So just quickly then, so we talked about Edinburgh before and how that's changed and how that was like a major way in which you got noticed. How has the festival comedy circuit changed? Not just Edinburgh, but just comedy festivals around the country?
Yeah, they're trying to set up, get festivals going in places like Leicester and Glasgow and stuff, but they tend to be expensive to do. So you got to hire a room and pay for accommodation, and then you try and sell tickets, you can't sell any tickets, and it's like I haven't done them in years. Maybe I'd be able to shift a few more tickets now because I've got a bit more profile. Edinburgh, I did for years, and I mean the last people, everybody says, oh, it costs so much money. People spend like 10 grand on it, because renting a flat is like 5 grand. Paying for your venue and everything is so much money. You don't make enough money from tickets to cover hardly any of it. But I've actually doing the free fringe, so your room's really cheap, and you're selling tickets, but also people can come in and they can donate in the bucket. You can sell merchandise. You can make a decent whack of money. And overseas festivals like the ones in Australia are usually quite lucrative as well. So yeah, just now festivals have become more of a, like I said before, more of a just fun thing to do. Like before I had a kid, before I was married and stuff, I'd go and do the Australian festivals every year, because then from January to March, you're in the sunshine. It's amazing. You miss the winter in the UK.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, festivals. Because you're doing, like in Australia, you're doing all these, sort of pub gigs and stuff. So they can be, they're like work rather than, somewhere where you, create some great piece of art or something. You know what I mean? A lot of times you're doing 20-minute spots shouting dick jokes.
Yeah, not the most original jokes around. Now, with this podcast, one of the things I want to do, because especially over the last decade, we talk a lot about we don't like this, we don't like that, but then a lot of people don't actually implement any ideas to try and change things. Yeah. So what I was going to say is, what events are there that people can go to that you like for example, like a Comedy Unleash, which is brilliant for what it does, but are there any other events like that And also, are there any other comedians that you've seen on the live circuit that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, on the live scene, I'm trying to think, man. Radu Izak, he's a Romanian guy, man. He's so funny. He's just got such a weird way of looking at the world, man. I love him. In fact, I booked him for. That's another thing. Hating Live is a night that I run with Darius Davies, who's another great comedian, as well as Radu. But Hating Live is like, so the audience writes down what they hate. It goes into a bucket, and we pull it out, and then the comedians have to say why they hate that thing, and it's wild. Like, you know, you never know what's coming out of the bucket. You never know what the comedian's going to say. And I think because the audience is complicit in it, because they've written down the ideas, like, you know, the comedians can say, you know, more outrageous things. So that's really fun. We're doing that on April the 26th at the Backyard Club in London. But yeah, the best nights, are Comedy Unleashed. So they run a night in London, but they've also got a night starting in Leeds. And Top Secret Comedy in London is just like, man, it's just the best club. And that guy doesn't cancel people. I mean, unless you've done something genuinely horrible, like you're a joke thief or something, then, you know, you get cancelled. But he doesn't cancel people if they've made some minor transgression that everybody's crying about on the internet. But funnily enough, because I used to do my own show there every month, and somebody wrote an email in, and they said, we came to see Leo Kearse's show in July, and it was horrific and offensive. And we walked out in disgust. We came back to see it again in October, and he was still horrific and offensive. Can you please stop booking him? And it's like, why do you keep coming? What the hell are you doing? Are you mental? You hated me, and then you thought you'd come back again to see if you still hate me. People want to be offended these days.
Yeah, it seems like not only do people want to be offended, but they almost want other people not to be offended as well. It's like I said to you before, there seems to be these certain groups and certain people talk on behalf of other people and other people groups, as though they're the experts. And personally, for me, I just find that whole thing frustrating. It's like, just let me judge it by myself, and then I'll make my own mind up.
Yeah, totally. And yet people want to get in that argument, that, you know, that battle. And I can sort of understand why. It's like, you know, in the old days there was a lot more, you know, racism, homophobia, all that kind of stuff. So then the people who you know, came out and defeated it, they've still got that big axe that they used to defeat it. So they're looking around for other things to smash. But the most they can find is a comedian, you know, saying some, like, you know, slightly offhand thing. And they're still like, oh, we must destroy his life and everything. It's like, whoa, that's a bit of an overreaction.
Yeah, he's crazy. He's crazy. I mean, Leo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about the comedy scene. I need to go to more gigs myself, actually, but it's been absolutely about the comedy scene. Where can we find your work? Both, I know you've got Twitter accounts, but you said you post stuff on YouTube as well. What type does that come under? What other stuff are you doing? What other stuff are you have planned?
So I've got, I mean, you can see me about 3 or 4 nights a week on GB News on Headliners at 11 p.m. That's comedians going through the next day's news stories. It's a really fun show. But yeah, also my YouTube account. It's doing great. It's got like 46,000 subscribers, I think. And yeah, I put regular videos and stuff up on there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Are you based in the Midlands?
Yeah, I'm based in the Midlands. Yeah.
Man, there's a comedian you'd love, Masai Graham, and he does really sort of like dark puns. He's really funny. Really sort of, some of them are quite evil and twisted. He gets in trouble quite a lot, but he's really good. He's a really nice guy as well.
Oh, cool. Excellent. Again, Leo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for speaking to me. And tell your daughter, I think her singing was absolutely great.
Thanks, Chris. Good speaking to you.
Yeah, you too. Likewise. Take care.
Take care, man.